Welcome to the Long Island Pine Barrens Society program. I'm Dick Amper.
And I'm Kathleen Nasta.
And since this year marks the 25th anniversary of the Pine Barrens Protection Act, we've been looking at the major milestones required for permanent preservation of the Long Island Pine Barrens back in 1993. Our final chapter covers the historic meeting that won broad support for preservation and the historic bill, the bill signing of the Pine Barrens Protection Act.
That's right. Once the 3.5 years of litigation ended with the state's highest court admonishing the New York State Legislature to fashion a law that would preserve the land and protect Long Island's underground water supply, the Pine Barrens Society brought together Long Island leaders from government, business, and the environment to win agreement to negotiate a bill that would serve the economy and the environment and end the War of the Woods.
You know, it was an excellent strategy, if I do say so myself. The Pine Barrens Society produced a day-long conference at the Radisson Plaza in Huntington, inviting Long Island leaders and 3 special guests: Robert Yarrow of the Regional Plan Association, Terrance Moore, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Pinelands Commission, and Armondo Carbonell. He was the counterpart at the Cape Cod Commission. Our purpose, of course, was simply to bring those who had successfully protected their pine barrens to explain to Long Island leaders how it got done. The conference was called Why Can't Long Island?
Former combatants, weary from the years of battle, assembled for what turned out to be a decisive chapter in the battle to save the Pine Barrens. Dick, you were the first speaker, setting a tone of reconciliation and cooperation.
Reconciliation and cooperation.
Perhaps the most important word we'll hear here today will be cooperation. If we work together and not as adversaries, if we focus on the things we agree about and not on the areas where we disagree, if we have the will to overcome our differences and achieve common ground, then the answer to the question of the day, why can't Long Island, will be Long Island can. This morning marks a new beginning, a positive and optimistic new beginning, brimming with promise and hope. For if every interest, public and private, general and special, accepts and accommodates with conciliation and compromise, then the resulting new spirit of cooperation will benefit the interests of each and every resident of Long Island. And if Long Islanders answer today's question, why can't Long Island, with Long Island can, then we can begin to answer tomorrow's question, why won't Long Island, with Long Island will.
Robert Yarrow is the president of the Regional Plan Association, an organization that has helped shape some of the most progressive planning in the tri-state metropolitan area.
The Regional Plan Association is an independent nonprofit organization that has been doing long-range planning for the tri-state area for about 70 years now. Things that you don't even think about, but the network of parkways and public open spaces. Bob Moses, doesn't like to share any credit for the park system, but the plans for the park system were first developed in RPA's first regional plan in the 1920s, along with the parkways, the bridges and tunnels and so forth that make this region function. That's the Regional Plumbing Association side of what we do.
Now it was time for those who had already protected their pine barrens. Terrance Moore was Executive Director of the New Jersey Pinelands Commission, protector of 1 million acres of pine forest. The specific actions taken in New Jersey would prove to be the underpinnings of the Long Island Pine Barrens Protection Act.
The approaches that we followed in the Pinelands were, at the time of their invention, controversial. There were litigation activities that occurred that were expensive and not very successful. In 1993, I think perhaps we have come to a different relationship with the users of the landscape of the New Jersey Pinelands and with those who seek to protect it. This is a very unique situation where everyone tends to agree, and we received not one single application for development, haven't in the last 7 years, in the core preservation area of the Pinelands. We all agree, we administrators, we environmentalists, we developers, we don't go there. Basic agreement. We also agree that the state's infrastructure dollars, the state's educational dollars, the state's growth-inducing dollars are better spent in specific locations than scattered about the landscape as a whole. An interesting economic tidbit for those who are interested in their housing value. I live in Indian Mills, New Jersey, inside the New Jersey Pinelands. The economic studies that have been done on my region of the state indicate that my house, which is 15 years old, has a higher selling value than a comparable house located immediately outside the boundaries of the New Jersey Pinelands. Just think about that for a second. This is not cost of new housing. This is resale value. The reason for that is quite simple. There is a future that we who live within the Pinelands of New Jersey know. We know what's going to happen around the corner. I can tell you how many houses forever will be built in my town. And I know that I will pay taxes that will not escalate and escalate because I've cut off development. But I also know that those very special areas of Indian Mills, New Jersey, are there for my children, their children, more importantly than all of that, they're there for me to enjoy today and for quite a time to come. So I'm pleased to come to Long Island. I hope that perhaps in 10 years I can return and you can tell me some stories about your special place.
Next up, Armondo Carbonell, who explained how protecting the Cape Cod Pine Barrens was greeted with indifference at the outset, but won enthusiastic approval as the local environmental resources were protected.
The Cape Cod Commission Act came out of a lengthy process of local debate. I have to tell you that for at least a couple of years, the general reaction to the idea of a special regional land use authority on Cape Cod was greeted with tremendous skepticism. The questions were either, why do we need such a thing? Why would we want such a thing? Or even if we need it or want it, how can we possibly get such a thing? It's unprecedented that an area recognizes a need for resource management, goes to the state legislature, asks for it, and gets it. And yet we found after a considerable amount of local preparation that we could file a bill in the state legislature and have it passed and signed by the governor in the same session in which it was introduced. I hope you can have the same success here. It is pretty unusual, but when unusual things happen, they tend to happen fairly quickly. As a result of that grassroots effort, this was a popularly supported proposal. There were several referendum votes on Cape Cod dealing with the question of regional resource management. Prior to the legislation being filed, 76% of voters in a non-binding referendum approved the idea of a Cape Cod Commission. Following the passage of the act, the creation of the tax, which was a new idea, and a fairly negative publicity campaign against the legislation, a smaller majority of the voters adopted the act in 1990. We have found since that time in a number of tests in communities that hadn't been dominantly in favor of a regional authority, that every test at the ballot box or at town meeting has been deflected by very substantial majorities in the range of 60 to 40 and greater supporting retention of a Cape Cod Commission. So it's a new idea, but it's already an idea that people have asked a lot of questions about, and it has passed those tests.
Kathy, the more Long Islanders saw of how the Pine Barrens preservation could be achieved, the more the audience moved toward the Long Island can point of view.
So, who was next?
Well, James LaRocca, who headed the island's largest business group, the Long Island Association, had been convening environmentalists and business people, mainly developers, in an effort to bring the sides to consensus. He was articulate and persuasive.
We have, when we connect these dots, a significant reduction in the size of our workforce, an outflow of young people, this process of depreciation or deflation in the value of our real estate, and therefore the value of the tax system that we have. We are meeting at a time of extreme economic challenge to this region. I'm not sure that making that observation necessarily tells us what the appropriate resolution of the issues is that bring us here together. But I believe it is an orientation that has to be part of this discussion all the way through. Now, I've come mainly to listen today. I'm very anxious to hear about the experiences of Cape Cod and New Jersey. These are areas that have significant similarities to the issue with which we are struggling, but also some important differences. And I think as we weigh their experiences, we should array them against both the similarities and differences in our communities. Now, our friend Tom Jorling at the Department of Environmental Conservation has reminded us that this generation of Long Islanders will make the decisions that will determine the final allocation of this landscape we call Long Island. Unlike a lot of other parts of this metropolitan region, there are physical limits to this geography. We are surrounded by water. As Long Island developed in all the years from the end of World War II, it could resolve virtually every public policy debate about growth and limits by simply pushing ever eastward. We, in many respects, deferred our decision making because there was always that next increment, that next opportunity to go east. Well, that clearly is no longer the case. So in some respects, we are facing up to issues that for many years we simply could avoid because the geography would allow us to avoid them.
Equally compelling was Michael A Grande, Chief of Staff for the Suffolk County Water Authority. He also held meetings aimed at finding consensus. A former acting Suffolk County executive, A Grande introduced the county's drinking water protection program and later served as executive director of a real estate developers group, so he could look at the challenge from both points of view.
So the area of compromise is in front of us. The time may be right, the seminar may be right. I want to tell the environmental groups here, since I both work on the quarter-cent sales tax, and by the way, when I drive between exit 71 and 72, and my kids are in the car, I tell them, I saved all of this. That's 4 miles of driving. But the truth of the matter is that while I worked on that, I was also the executive director of the Association for Better Long Island. Some people say it's the Association for Blacktop Long Island, which was a little unfair. But the truth of the matter is that I too want to see some level of compromise more in my position today as the chairman and CEO of the Suffolk County Water Authority, because we have as big a stake, if not more, in the preservation of the Pine Barrens, and also seeing that the economy is properly developed, that land use patterns emerge that are sensible, and that we have a good, solid future in terms of our land use existence and quality of life, and our water supply, of course, which is ours. I want to say to the environmental groups and to the builders too, don't exclude people with potential, with resources, with intelligence, who are sharp. Don't exclude them. And if Charlie Mancini was sitting up here and will be present, along with this very distinguished panel, who we will get to in a second, I would have asked him, would you help me save the Pine Barrens? And will you help in participating in that process? That's a very, very different question that we've experienced over the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, It looks as though environmental and business leaders came to much of a meeting of minds on that historic day.
Absolutely.
When the program was over, you took some of the presenters, especially the ones from the other Pine Barrens regions, to a television studio to record a program that would be aired on Cablevision for all Long Islanders to see.
Now, here's Carl Grossman.
We're here to talk about Long Island's last wilderness. These are the Long Island Pine Barrens. There were once 250,000 acres of pine barrens here. They cover the purest supply of water left on Long Island. If the development that has sprawled over so much of western Long Island is allowed to cover what's left of the Long Island Pine Barrens, that pure water, this unusual ecosystem, stands to be lost. Other areas have successfully saved their unique ecosystems. Why can't Long Island? And let me ask that question first of Armondo Carbonell, who is the executive director of the Cape Cod Commission. Armondo.
Thanks. What we've done on Cape Cod is bring our 15 different municipalities together in a regional planning process. We've created a regional policy plan which lays out the expectations of the community and the rules for new development. And for the last 3 years, we've actually been regulating development according to a new set of standards. We think this has worked very well for us, both in terms of protecting important environmental resources and providing for needed jobs and housing on Cape Cod.
Armondo, how's it been received by the people who live up there? Is this something that they think has been a boon principally to environmentalists or strictly to the economic sector, or is it being well received?
This was a major change for Cape Cod, and it was initially greeted with considerable skepticism. But in the last 3 years, there have been a number of tests, both at town meetings and on the ballot, that suggest that, by and large, the people of Cape Cod support these changes and are very satisfied with them.
On the issue of home rule, Armondo, here on Long Island and in Cape Cod, there are many levels of government. How have you been able to get all those levels of government together?
As you know, New Englanders and Cape Codders in particular pride themselves on the idea of home rule, and yet they were very concerned that home rule wasn't delivering the kind of results that they wanted in land use planning. Instead of doing away with home rule on Cape Cod, what we did was bring together 15 communities in a regional unit which has a kind of a regional home rule power. It speaks up to state government and tells state officials what people on Cape Cod want to see happen in terms of state decision making, but it's also a very powerful way for Cape Cod communities to speak about the things that they agree in a collective voice.
Actually, there are only three municipalities in a single county involved in the Long Island Pine Barrens situation. Terrance Moore, the executive director of the New Jersey Pinelands Commission, boy, you got 1 million acres and a much bigger operation. How many home rules do you have to deal with?
We have 7 separate counties and 53 separate municipalities, and 22% of the state of New Jersey that makes up our Pine Barrens.
And have you had trouble with them, with their skepticism at the outset? You've had this program in place now for more than a decade. Was there some skepticism as to how that would work in terms of home rule, or upset by the developers?
Yeah, I think every new land use endeavor has those things attached to them. Fact of the matter in New Jersey, however, is that today 49 of those 53 municipalities have complied and revised entire master plans and zoning ordinances to fit the regional plan into local decision making. I think it's important to note that, as Armondo is at Cape Cod, that in New Jersey too, it is the local jurisdiction that makes the day-to-day decisions on the implementation of the plan.
And Mr. Carbonell, what are you saving in Cape Cod, and how precisely are you saving it?
Well, we're trying to save more than just physical environmental resources, although those are very important. Our drinking water supply, as yours, is a groundwater source, and it's very fragile and very susceptible to contamination, as we've learned from some very sad experiences. So we've tried to save physical resources, but we're also trying to save a way of life. We're very interested in the heritage of Cape Cod and the character of our communities and in the differences in our communities. And rather than trying to create a homogeneous region, what we're trying to do is allow individual communities to continue to express themselves as they have over hundreds and indeed thousands of years in some cases.
And what's the mechanism? How does it work?
The mechanism includes a few basic ingredients. A regional plan, which is an articulation of the vision of the community, and a set of standards for development. A review authority for larger projects at the regional level, a mechanism for local plans to be adopted with the assistance of our regional agency, and new local development rules which will govern future development. A lot of what we do is very familiar to people. It's not a drastic change from familiar forms. Local governments are still making the vast majority of land use decisions, but they're making them according to a blueprint that was adopted by the whole community, and that is the value of the regional plan.
Terry, how has this actually worked out in the state of New Jersey? How's it worked out for the developers? What sort of experience do they have? Are they getting their approvals? Is it taking them more time? Is it cumbersome? How's it worked out in terms of preservation of water and of land?
Well, I think for the developer within the system that we're involved with in New Jersey, there is the very specific confidence of knowing where to go to develop and what the rules are that we're operating under when we do develop. That is a cost-saving measure. It's also important for developers to know, particularly in our case, that in all of the municipalities that they go into in New Jersey and the Pinelands, they're dealing with the same rules. This is not a guessing game. This is a very well-coordinated state, county, and local implementation of a plan that really covers 22% of our state.
Robert Yarrow, you're the Executive Director of the Regional Plan Association, cover all of the New York metropolitan area and beyond that.
Right.
How applicable are the models in New Jersey, in Cape Cod, to us here on Long Island?
I think they're really very applicable, and we're seeing the same kind of trend that's affecting the Long Island Pine Barrens throughout the region, in a ring that's 50 to 80 miles out from Manhattan, whether it's the Catskills, New York City's public water supplies, whether it's the highlands of northwestern New Jersey or the mid-Hudson Valley. We're seeing the same kind of conflict between preservation concerns, water resources concerns, and the juggernaut of metropolitan development. And throughout the region, we're working with communities to try to find new ways to reconcile these pressures. And we've looked at these two models and think that they are really quite applicable. There are others that ought to be considered as well and that need to be looked at as we design a system for Long Island that meets the unique circumstances here.
What's been the problem on Long Island? Where have we gone wrong? Why are we not happy with the way Long Island looks and works right now, and what could we do to make it better?
Well, I mean, Long Island, which has been one of the garden spots of the Western world, and I'm a native Long Islander, I can say that. I think we've done an enormous amount of damage to the western end of the island. 60 years ago, we could have had this discussion about the farms of Flushing and what might happen there. So we've had an enormous amount of change in a very short period of time. Long Island is almost totally dependent on the automobile in the way that it's developed, and water resources are one way of determining carrying capacity. I think before we get there, we're going to see that highway congestion is going to be the limiting factor in growth. And already, I think a part of what we're seeing with the downturn of the economy is companies not wanting to expand here because the place is so congested. So we've got to find new models to protect not only the natural resources, but the economy of Long Island. I think that's why people are so unhappy. Rapid change and a pattern of development that really has become inconvenient and uneconomic for everybody in the island.
What's the solution? What's the fix? What's your vision, or what do we need to do that we haven't been doing?
Well, if you distill out what works in the Jersey Pinelands and in Cape Cod, I think it really comes down to two things. One is a new set of ground rules for land use and development on Long Island. And what this doesn't mean, by the way, that we have to either shut down development or buy back the rest of Long Island. We can't afford to do either of those two things. I think what it does suggest is that we need to find some new creative ways of accommodating development, again, in patterns of development that are good for the economy at the same time that they're good for the landscape, good for the natural resources of Long Island. The kind of models we're looking at here, again, what these two regional commissions do is to set some standards for local land use plans and land use regulations that towns can then adopt and administer themselves.
How would you suggest we get from here to there on Long Island? I mean, we're at a critical point. How do you think perhaps we can move ahead?
Well, I think at this point we see that both the environmental community and the development community, I think, is realizing that they're not winning, that neither side is winning. And so I think there's a historic opportunity here to get both ends of the spectrum, the building community, the developers, the economic development officials, on one end of the spectrum and the environmental community and the others, town officials, of course, have to be a part of this. I think there's an opportunity to bring together these groups into a coalition that's never existed before in Long Island to again, look at how we're developing now, what the risks are, build support for an alternative system. And again, a system that has to be based on continued local responsibility, but underlying responsibility there. Responsibility to protect the things that are special and important to Long Islanders.
Terry and Armondo in particular, we're going through a lot of turmoil. Long Island's going through a lot of pushing and pulling and tugging and controversy over this. Is this something that you experienced? I guess we'll start with Terry. Is this unique to us? Or,
Welcome to the club.
We're just getting to something that you encountered. How was the Pinelands Commission first approached and responded to?
Well, there were many crowded meetings, many late nights. The fact that that occurs is a very healthy thing in the system of the type of planning that people get involved in. That exchange of viewpoints, that kind of discussion between the variety of interests that have very real roles to play in carrying out the implementation of the plan is very, very important. And it's not something that anyone should back away from. It's something that people should join in and join in the discussion, join in even if there is shouting, and there can be that at times in all land use endeavors. That's part of the participation that brings a good product out in the end, I think.
Armondo, they're telling us here on Long Island that what we're trying to do, this balancing act between the economy and the environment and getting legislation in here that will create a regional plan's impossible. Did they tell you that?
They certainly did, and our meetings were pretty excited as well. I think when you have, on one hand, all of the expectations of the community about its future, and you can see that future very, very real in front of your eyes. The final allocation, as we've heard of Long Island, is about to be done in this generation. That time is coming. Very important decisions for the whole community, and at the same time, very substantial impacts on property rights. And in the United States property rights system, this is an absolutely critical consideration in any land use planning. It has to be made very clear to people on Long Island that there will be a mechanism to deal in a just and equitable way with people's private property holdings at the same time that we satisfy the community's aspirations for the future. There are many techniques for this. In the New Jersey Pinelands, a number of successes have been seen in the use of a system called transferable development rights, which ensures that when the rules change, people are not unfairly penalized or disproportionately rewarded because of their good fortune. And I think systems like that will work on Long Island as well to make sure that the rights and the financial expectations of people who have invested here in the past are reasonably satisfied.
A big day for you and the Long Island Pine Barrens Society.
And I think for all of Long Island.
Yes, agreed.
Well, join us again next time when we'll take a look at the entirety of the signing ceremony as it occurred back in 1993. I'm Dick Amper.
And I'm Kathleen Nesta.
Thanks
we'll see
for
you next
joining
time.
us. Yep. The Long Island Pine Barrens. Let's protect them.